Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and today we are going to talk about another tabletop miniatures game. Something I didn't really go over in the Warhammer video is that there are actually a lot of war games out there which are played at different scales. And I don't necessarily mean scales like how the figure sizes compare to the various different scales of electric train sets, though that's not a bad thing to be aware of if you're trying to get terrain pieces, but more in the scale of what forces are manipulated on the battlefield. I didn't see any officially recognized terms for these, but the most common ones I found come in sort of these three groups. You have skirmish scale, games where you control the individual soldiers like Warhammer and War Machine, or even HeroClix. You have formation scale, where you control entire infantry units loaded onto trays who otherwise behave like the individual characters of skirmish scale. This includes a lot of historical war games that reenact major battles to really get that big feel. Games like Black Powder Epic or the horribly out of its depth Arcane Legions make use of this scale. And then we have vehicle scale, easily the most common, where the character units are instead things like tanks, planes, and ships, both seafaring and spacefaring. This includes games like Star Wars X-Wing, Battletech and its HeroClix version MechWarrior, Warhammer's very own Aeronautica, the old Pirates of the Spanish Main where the ships are made of cards, and of course, the subject of today's video, Dropzone Commander. I mean, there's also Provincial Scale, which is a total nightmare, but forget it, we're talking about Dropzone Commander. Dropzone Commander is a game that came out nearly 10 years ago and was made by Hawk Wargames, as indicated by the little tape measure that came in the starter set. They actually sent me this starter set a long time ago, and I did film a video for it, but I felt that the video was not up to the quality that this game deserved. Although, now that I have a new set of lights and camera, I think I can finally handle it. As you can see, Dropzone Commander is played at vehicle scale. You can see that this light tank is closer in scale to a Space Marine than it is to an actual Warhammer light tank. Dropzone Commander is set in the far future, after a terrible, assimilating, Borg-like force known as the Scourge took over planet Earth. Now, various forces probe the crumbling remains to try to retake mankind's home. A lot of people seem to think this game went away, but yeah, the game is actually still around. Now in the care of Troll Trader Combat, it actually got some new model reveals just last week, a pair of lumbering behemoths that wipe out the idea of taking cover. Now, like with trading card games, a miniature war game needs a sort of killer app to really stand out amongst the crowd. Warhammer's the really big and popular one, War Machine is the cheap one, HeroClix is the really cheap one, X-Wing and Legion are the high-profile licensed ones. So what does Dropzone Commander have? Well, what it does is it gets rid of probably the biggest stumbling block of most miniature war games. So, asking generally, what is the most awkward part of any miniatures game? It's deployment, right? I mean, you've put out the terrain and placed the objective tokens and read the mission you have to fulfill and you're raring to go, but first you have to wait and take your time setting up all of your minis so that they are just so. This process can take so long that it is a viable tactic for orc players to field an army that requires so much setup time that the opponent surrenders out of boredom. Though the earth trembles when said player encounters an Imperial Guard player who can deploy the same tactic. With Dropzone Commander, however, once the terrain and objectives are in place, setup is done. Yep, that's it. Onwards to the first turn. You see, Dropzone Commander is a rapid deployment strike force strategy game. Turn 1 sees your units come screaming onto the map from the far edge rather than having to be placed beforehand, combining your first move and your unit deployment into the same gesture. Each of these dropships can then drop their vehicles into their deployment spots, and if those vehicles are APCs, those can then drop their squads onto the field, each unit only being added to the board as they are first unloaded. This allows you to keep your army set to the side, or even in storage until they needed to be added to play. Now, the actual goal of the game, as fitting for a rapid response strike force, is to get your soldiers to recover the objectives, then use your APCs and dropships to haul those objectives off of the board for double points, while your artillery units try to destroy the APCs and dropships of your opponent. Troops can garrison inside buildings for safety, but heavy cannon fire can bring them tumbling down, so keeping your opponent in check is mandatory. The result is more of a delicate dance than most miniatures games. Rather than holding objectives, you're trying to retrieve and run away with them, and where dropships and APCs will try to stay out of danger, weaving in and out of buildings to avoid your opponent's patrolling armor, which inevitably come to conflict with your own. Yeah, it's unlikely that an actual game would form the cluster you see here. The armies included here, featuring the United Colonies of Mankind and the Scourge, feel very distinct. The UCM is patient and heavy, touting long-range guns and heavy armor, with an articulated barrel feature that lets them raise their guns to get over cover, meaning that the units don't block each other's line of sight, while the Scourge use more of a rushdown style with greater movement and weapons that are devastating at close range. Terrain is a very important part of Dropzone Commander because it gives these sorts of dropships cover to hide behind to protect themselves from the tanks, which frequently have ranges that can reach from one side of the board to the other, which is why in this original version of the starter set, which cost about $60, it includes not only a map, but 10 of these folding collapsible buildings to act as obstacles, which makes me look at the quote-unquote terrain included in Warhammer's $100 starter sets, and I'm just, hey, do you think we should include some nice papercraft terrain in the starter set? Nah, just throw in an Amtrak food box and call it a day. Those morons won't know the difference. The modern version of this set is nearly the same with the same core squads of members, but it ditches these buildings in favor of giving each army a command unit. However, if you buy this starter set directly from the supplier, when it's in stock, you instead get a monster discount on a double-sized terrain pack. Another thing, I don't know if this has changed in the newer sets, but while you're only allowed to build a squad of 2 APCs each, the sprues come with 3 of them, leaving 1 left over to maybe test paint schemes or the like. You might have noticed that of the 3 miniatures that I painted up for the Warhammer video, 2 of them are the APCs. As for downsides, it does require a 4-foot by 4-foot space to play in a world where most tables are 3 feet deep at most. Also, I wish these buildings were more storage friendly. Maybe if there was a version that used a crash lock to make it easier to snap open and closed, or if they were designed with nesting in mind. Just spitballing here. They also have premium terrain too, of course, mostly laser-cut wood building sets. The starter set may be frequently out of stock, but they also have these army starters, which, when included with a rulebook, includes basically 2 copies of the 2-player starter army of your choice for the same price. Basically a 1-box mid-size army by the rulebook standards, or a combat patrol box by Warhammer's, but with the money left over to add a heavy support kit. A full battle force for the price of 1 start collecting box. Okay, maybe it is another Warhammer but cheaper, but come on! Sadly, this does not include the discount on the terrain pack, and with how much those matter, I'd say at this point that we might want to pray for a restock on the 2-player starter set. They are N-scale models, however, so use that information as you may. But yeah, that's Dropzone Commander, a game that feels very different from the normal 2 heads clashing together war games you might be used to. If you were sleeping on it the way I was, it just got a new lease on life late last year, so now is as good a time to look into the game as any. I don't see a lot of support outside the UK right now, though I have found a US seller on eBay for the older stuff, but if you want to try a fast-paced miniatures game of a different color, then this might be what you're looking for. That was Dropzone Commander by Troll Trader Games, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off.